I opened the locked door and found what he was hiding, a man and tools. My name is Elijah. I'm 28 years old, and I never thought I'd tell this story publicly, but after what I discovered, I feel like I have no choice. Growing up, I had a relatively normal childhood, or at least, I thought I did. We lived in a quiet rural town in Montana. My father, Richard, was a carpenter. Quiet, intense, and always working on something in the garage or his workshop in the backyard. My mother died when I was 7 in a car accident, they told me. After that, Dad was never quite the same. More distant, more strict. I learned early not to ask too many questions. When I turned 18, my father disappeared. No note. No warning. Just vanished. The police did what they could, but no leads turned up. Eventually, they ruled it as a voluntary disappearance. Sometimes people just walk away, one officer told me. But I never believed that. I knew something was wrong. He left his tools behind. His truck. Even his dog. Nothing about it made sense. I spent years trying to move on. I went to college, started working in IT, even moved to another city. But I could never shake the feeling that something had been buried literally or figuratively. 2 months ago, I got a call from an attorney. My father had been declared legally dead, and I was now the sole inheritor of his property. I hadn't been back to that house in over a decade. The thought of returning made my stomach twist, but I had to know. When I arrived, the house looked like it had been frozen in time. Dust-covered furniture, yellowing wallpaper, the same creaky floorboards. I walked through each room, memories flooding in, until I reached the back. His workshop. It was locked. Of course, it was locked. My dad never let me inside when I was a kid. He used to say, "That's my place, son. Dangerous tools in there." I broke the lock. Inside was a workshop all right, but it wasn't for building birdhouses or fixing chairs. The place looked like something out of a horror film. There were tools, yes, but surgical tools. Chains. Stains on the floor I didn't want to identify. And a trapdoor. In the far corner, half covered by a rug and a pile of wood, was a metal ring bolted to the floor. I tugged at it, expecting it to be stuck, but no. It creaked open. A ladder led down into darkness. My heart raced. I stood there for what felt like forever. My logical brain told me to stop, to call someone, but I couldn't. I needed to know. I needed to know what my father had been hiding all those years. And what I found. I still can't sleep. I hesitated for a moment, standing at the top of the ladder, staring down into the darkness. Every fibre of my being screamed at me to turn back, to leave the house and never return. But curiosity, the kind that gnaws at you until it overwhelms your fear, kept me rooted in place. I took a deep breath and descended into the basement. The air grew colder the deeper I went. The smell hit me first, something metallic, pungent like rust and old blood. The space was small, barely enough for me to stand fully upright. Licking on the flashlight I found in my pocket, I scanned the room. My hand shook as I swept the light over the walls. There were shelves filled with jars. Large glass jars. Most of them were covered in thick dust, but the contents inside were clear enough. Organs. Preserved in liquid. My stomach lurched. I couldn't understand what I was seeing. Was this some sick joke? Was my father into some kind of macabre art? But it didn't make sense. Why would he keep all this hidden from me? Then I noticed something else. At the far end of the basement, against the wall, was a large steel cage. My pulse quickened. I approached slowly, unsure of what I would find. The cage was covered in old, torn sheets, and I yanked them off, my heart in my throat. Inside was a body. A man. His skin was pale and bloated, like he had been dead for weeks, maybe longer. His hands were bound with thick ropes, his mouth guarded with a dirty cloth. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a box. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. This wasn't possible. But it was real. I ran up the ladder, nearly falling in my haste, and slammed the trapdoor shut behind me. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breath ragged. What the hell had my father been doing down there? I had to know. There was no turning back now. I searched the workshop for any clue, any sign that would make sense of this madness. That's when I found the old journal. It was tucked behind a pile of scrap wood, its leather cover cracked and worn. I opened it cautiously, my eyes scanning the pages. The handwriting was messy, erratic. The entry spoke of experiments failed, successful, horrifying. Each page was worse than the last. My father hadn't just been a carpenter. He had been a butcher. A monster in the guise of a man who had taken people, experimented on them, kept them trapped for days, sometimes longer. Some of them had never made it out alive. There were names, dates, locations, and in the last entry, something that chilled me to my core. I'll never stop. No one will ever find out the truth. Elijah is next. I dropped the journal, my hands trembling. My father, he had been planning this for years, and I was his next victim. I ran from the workshop, my mind spinning. The police had to know. They needed to know what I had found. But the feeling in my gut told me it was too late. My father had covered his tracks well, and he was still out there, somewhere. I needed to leave. But something told me I wasn't done yet. The truth was just beginning to unfold, and I had to find the answers before it was too late. And that's when I heard it. A sound from the basement. The trapdoor creaked open. He was home. I froze, my blood running cold. The sound of the trapdoor creaking echoed in the stillness of the house. I had to think fast, my mind was racing. My father was home, and whatever twisted game he had been playing was far from over. I wasn't sure if he was aware of me being there or if he was just coming to check on his project, but the mere fact that I wasn't alone in the house anymore sent a cold wave of terror over me. I grabbed my phone, my hand slick with sweat. I needed to call the police now. But the moment I opened the contact list, something stopped me. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. The town had always been so small, so isolated. Who would believe me? I'd already seen how they wrote off my father's disappearance, how they brushed it off like it was some kind of personal choice. Would they believe that he'd been hiding bodies in his basement? Would they believe my story? I had no answers, but I knew I needed to act fast. I crept toward the back door, hoping I could slip out and run before he saw me. But the floorboard creaked under my weight, the sound sharp and deafening. It was like everything slowed down and I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, louder than anything else. Then a voice. My father's voice. Well, Elijah. It was a whisper at first. I know you're here. I turned to the stairs leading up to the kitchen, but the doorway was blocked. There he was, standing in the dark hallway, his silhouette barely visible in the weak light of the house. He looked different. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. He was no longer the man I had known. He was something darker, something twisted. And there, in his hand, was a knife. Why? I choked out. Why would you do this, Dad? What are you doing to these people? What is this? He didn't answer. Instead, he just stepped forward, slowly, dragging the knife along the floor. The sound was sickening, like scraping metal against stone. You don't understand, he muttered, his voice low and calm, almost as if he was speaking to himself. It's necessary. They all serve a purpose, Elijah, you'll see. You'll be part of it soon enough. I couldn't breathe. My father was no longer human to me. He was a monster, a serial killer in plain sight, and I was his next project. He started moving toward me, the blade gleaming under the dim light, his footsteps slow but deliberate. I had to get out of there. I had to escape before it was too late. In a blind panic, I bolted for the front door. But as I reached the threshold, my foot caught on the rug. I stumbled, crashing to the ground. The knife flashed above me, just inches from my face. I turned and saw my father's eyes wide with excitement, almost delirious with it. He was enjoying this. I couldn't afford to wait. I pushed myself up, scrambled to my feet, then threw myself toward the door, slamming it open. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my breath ragged, my body trembling with terror. I sped off into the night, not even looking back. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that my father wasn't done with me. That whatever horror he had started was far from over. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something terrifying. He had been planning this all along. He knew I would come back. He knew I would find him. And now I had to find a way to stop him. Before he found me first. The drive was a blur. My mind was consumed with 1,000 thoughts, all spinning uncontrollably. I couldn't stop picturing my father's face twisted, his eyes beaming with something sinister, something I had never seen before. That look, the joy in his expression as he raised the knife, it was like he was savouring every moment of my fear. And it terrified me. I didn't know where to go, so I drove aimlessly. The town was small, there were only a handful of places I could turn to for help, and none of them felt safe anymore. No one would believe me. They'd think I was crazy. And my father? He had always been so well liked, so trusted. Everyone knew him as a quiet man who kept to himself. How could they even begin to fathom what he had been doing in the house? But I knew the truth, and the truth was worse than anything I could have imagined. I finally pulled into a small motel on the outskirts of town. It was cheap, run down, but it would have to do for now. I needed a place to think, to figure out my next move. I couldn't go to the police, not yet. Not until I had something solid, something undeniable that could prove what my father was. I parked in the back lot under a dim streetlight and hurried inside. I rented a room with cash, trying not to draw attention to myself. But as I stepped into the dingy room, I felt a sense of unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I locked the door behind me, slid the bolt, and collapsed onto the bed. My mind raced, going over everything I had seen in that basement. The bodies, the tools, the journal. My father had been collecting people, experimenting on them, keeping them locked away for who knows how long. And now, it seemed, I was the next victim in his sick game. I needed answers. I had to go back. Thought struck me like a lightning bolt. I had to go back to the house, to the basement, and find something, anything that would prove what my father had been doing. I couldn't let him get away with this. But then, as I reached for my phone, I received a message. It was from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it, my heart hammering in my chest. The message was short, cryptic. "He's not finished with you." That was all it said. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. My hand shook, and a chill ran down my spine. It could have been anyone. It could have been some sick joke. But I knew deep down it was him. My father was toying with me. The message lingered in my mind, gnawing at me. And then I realized something. If he knew I was alive, if he knew I had made it out, then he was coming for me. There was no escaping him. I needed to be smart. I had to stop him. But first, I needed to get the police involved. I couldn't fight this alone. I couldn't face the monster my father had become by myself. But before I could make the call, the power went out. Complete darkness. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, my pulse quickening. It wasn't the storm outside. I could hear the wind howling through the cracks in the walls. It was something else. Something unnatural. I felt the presence of something, lurking just outside my door. I stood motionless, barely breathing, as I listened. Then, the faintest sound of the soft creak of a floorboard. Someone was inside. My blood ran cold. I grabbed the nearest object I could find, a metal lamp, and held it in front of me, ready to defend myself. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I had to face whatever was coming, and it seemed that whatever had followed me to the motel had no intention of letting me go. Another creak, this time closer. Too close. I slowly turned my head toward the window, half expecting to see my father's face staring back at me. But there was nothing. No one. Yet the feeling in the pit of my stomach told me I wasn't alone. And then, a whisper. "Elijah." I froze, the lamp falling from my grip. The door handle turned. I didn't know who it was. But one thing was certain, my nightmare was far from over. And it was about to get worse. The door creaked open slowly, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, every beat a drum of terror. The light from the hallway barely pierced the darkness of the room. I stood frozen, my body stiff with fear, clutching the metal lamp in front of me like it was a lifeline. The whisper came again, this time more distinct. "Elijah." It was my father's voice. There was no mistaking it. But how? How could he have found me here? I had been so careful, so certain that no one knew I was at this motel. Had he been following me? Had he been one step ahead the entire time? The door inched further open, revealing nothing but shadows in the hallway. But I could feel the presence, the weight of it, just beyond my sight. The hairs on my neck stood on end as I gripped the lamp tighter, preparing for whatever came next. Suddenly, the door slammed open, and there he was. My father. But it wasn't the man I remembered. This was something else. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and his skin was pale, almost sickly. His clothes were tattered, like he had been living in them for days, maybe weeks. He looked like a creature that had been torn apart and put back together, something twisted and broken beyond recognition. Elijah. His voice was low, a rasping whisper as he stepped into the room, his face twisted into a grin that didn't belong to him. "You don't understand. Do you? You need to understand." I backed away, my body trembling, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. This was my father, the man who raised me, the man I had loved and trusted. And now here he was a monster, a stranger in his own skin. "You were always meant for this, Elijah. You were always meant to help me. You just didn't know it yet," he continued, his words filled with a disturbing calmness, like he was trying to convince me that this was all part of some grand plan. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what was real anymore. My father's madness had shattered everything I thought I knew about him. All those years, all that time he spent in the workshop, the basement, everything I had ignored, it was all part of something so much darker than I could ever imagine. "You think I'm crazy, don't you?" His eyes narrowed, his expression shifting into something darker. "You think I'm sick, but you don't understand. They were necessary, every single one of them. They were part of the plan, and now you're part of it too." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe. I could barely think. My mind was racing, trying to process everything he had just said. And then, as if reading my thoughts, he stepped forward, his movement slow, deliberate. "You're just like me, Elijah. You have it in you, the need, the hunger. It's in your blood." I shook my head, backing away even further. This wasn't my father. It couldn't be. This was something wearing his face. No, you're wrong. I'm not like you. I'm nothing like you." He laughed, a dry, choking sound that echoed in the small room. "We'll see about that." And then, in a blur of motion, he lunged at me. I barely had time to react. The lamp swung through the air, crashing against his shoulder, but he barely flinched. His hand shot out, grabbing me by the arm with a vice-like grip, pulling me toward him. "You can't escape, Elijah. You're mine now. You always were." I fought, I screamed, but it was useless. His strength was overwhelming, and my body was no match for his madness. I could feel the coldness of his fingers tightening around my wrist as he dragged me toward the door. But then, just as quickly as it had started, he froze. There was a sound. A distant noise, muffled but unmistakable. A car engine. Loud. Persistent. My father's grip loosened slightly, and for the briefest moment, I saw something fear. Panic. In his eyes. Before I could make sense of it, the door to the motel room slammed open. I barely registered the figure standing in the doorway before the sound of a gunshot rang out, deafening in the small space. My father's grip went slack, and he crumpled to the floor, a dark stain spreading across his chest. I turned toward the door, my breath caught in my throat. There, standing in the doorway, was a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and he held a gun in his hand. "Stay down," he ordered, his voice calm, but with an edge of urgency. "I'm here to help." I didn't know who he was or why he was there, but in that moment I didn't care. My father, the monster, was finally on the ground. But I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The nightmare was far from over. And whatever came next, I had a feeling I wouldn't be able to outrun it. I crouched by the bed, still trembling, watching the man in the doorway. My father's lifeless body lay crumpled on the floor, blood pooling around him in a slow, grotesque spread. The man with the gun, who was he? He didn't look like a cop. He didn't look like anyone I knew. His expression was calm, detached, as if this was all just another day on the job. You shot him?" I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. I was still in shock, my thoughts spinning wildly. "Why?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced down at my father's body, then back at me. There was no emotion in his eyes, nothing to hint at who he was or why he was here. Just cold, calculated focus. "Because he was never supposed to live this long," he said flatly, stepping into the room. His gaze swept over me like he was assessing whether or not I was a threat, but I didn't have the strength to care anymore. I was too numb, too shaken by everything that had happened. I tried to stand, but my legs felt like jelly. The room spun around me, and I barely managed to steady myself on the dresser. My head throbbed, and for a moment I just wanted to collapse into oblivion. But something in that man's voice, something in the coldness of his presence, pulled me back to reality. "What do you mean, he was never supposed to live this long?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "What's going on? Who are you? Why are you here?" He took a step forward, never once lowering the gun. It was aimed directly at my father, but I could tell he was prepared for anything. "You're not safe," he said, his voice soft but urgent. "Not yet, and it's not just your father you need to worry about." I blinked, trying to process the words. What are you talking about?" The man took a deep breath, and his eyes narrowed. "Your father wasn't just a carpenter, he was part of something much bigger, a project, a group, and they'll come after you, Elijah. It's not over." The weight of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. My mind raced, but I couldn't make sense of what he was saying. My father had always been distant, yes, but a part of some group. And they were coming after me? I shook my head, unable to comprehend. "Who are you? Why should I believe you?" The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked to the window and peered out, his gun still trained on the door. "Because you're already involved, you don't have a choice. Your father's death won't stop them. In fact, it's probably just going to make things worse." "Worse?" I echoed, panic rising in my chest. "What the hell does that mean?" He turned to me then, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of emotion in his eyes. It was brief, but it was there, something like regret. Or pity. They're a network of people, Elijah. They've been hiding in plain sight for decades. People like your father were just pawns in their game, testing the boundaries of human experimentation, survival, and beyond. He looked back at the door, his jaw tightening. "Your father was supposed to die a long time ago, but someone's been watching him, watching you." I felt dizzy. My father's experiments, the people he had trapped, the horrors he had committed in that basement, that was all part of something far worse than I could have imagined. A network of people doing God knows what with human lives. The man's voice interrupted my thoughts. "I'm here to stop them, but it's not going to be easy, and you're going to need to trust me if you want to survive." My mind raced. There was no way I could process all of this. My father wasn't just a killer. He was part of something much bigger, something dangerous. And I was right in the middle of it. I had no idea who this man was, or what he was involved in, but he was offering me something of survival. I didn't have a choice. I had to trust him, or I was as good as dead. "All right," I said, my voice shaking with fear, but also determination. "I'll trust you, but we need to get out of here. We need to leave before they come for us." The man gave me a brief nod, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "Good, let's move, and don't look back." I followed him out of the motel room, glancing one last time at my father's body. The man's words echoed in my head. It wasn't over. I wasn't safe. I had no idea where we were going or what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure: the nightmare had only just begun, and the people who were after me were much more dangerous than anything I had faced before. As I followed the man into the night, I realized that my life, everything I thought I knew about myself, my family, and my father was a lie, and the truth was something far darker than I could have ever imagined. I was trapped in a game I didn't understand, and the stakes were higher than I could have ever prepared for. We drove in silence for what felt like hours. The man behind the wheel, I still had no idea who he was, what he wanted, or why he was helping me. He had his focus fixed on the road, his expression unreadable. But I could see the weight of something pressing on him, like he knew exactly what we were up against. The fear that had gripped me earlier hadn't let go. My thoughts were a jumble of confusion, panic, and dread. Who were these people who were after me? What was this network the man had spoken of? And most importantly, why me? What did I have to do with any of this? My mind kept returning to the words he'd said. Your father was part of something much bigger. The image of him, the monster I'd once known as my father, and now haunted my thoughts. He hadn't just been a killer. He'd been a cog in something far more terrifying, something I couldn't even begin to understand. The man turned to me, his sharp eyes glancing at me for the first time since we'd started driving. His face was pale, grim, but there was a level of seriousness in his gaze that made me feel like he knew everything I needed to know. We're going to a place where you'll be safe, he said quietly. For now. Safe? I echoed. The word felt so alien to me. How can I be safe? You said they're coming from me. Who are they? Who the hell are you? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pushed his foot down on the accelerator, speeding down the road. We were heading out of town, toward the mountains. There was no sign of pursuit, but I knew that could change in an instant. Whoever was after me wouldn't waste time. They would hunt me down, and I had no idea how to fight back. We don't have time for explanations, he said, his voice clipped. But I'll give you this much, I'm part of a team, the group that deals with people like your father. People who do these kinds of things. You're not the first victim, Elijah, and you won't be the last. The words hit me hard, and I couldn't suppress a shiver. People like my father. That was what I was dealing with now. A whole network of people who experimented on others, who twisted and manipulated lives for their own sick purposes. I swallowed hard, trying to wrap my mind around it all. So, what? You're some kind of vigilante? He didn't respond immediately, his eyes focused on the dark road ahead. Not exactly. I'm not here to save you, Elijah. I'm here to make sure they don't get you. But I can't protect you forever. I glanced at him, confused. What do you mean? I don't need protecting, I need answers. He slowed the car and pulled into a remote cabin near the edge of the forest, its dark silhouette barely visible against the backdrop of the night. The area was desolate, completely cut off from the rest of the world. It was exactly what I needed, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that even this place wouldn't be enough to keep us safe. We're here, he said, cutting the engine. You are going to stay here while we figure out what comes next. I stepped out of the car, looking around at the small, run-down cabin. It was surrounded by thick trees, offering plenty of cover. But the silence of the place felt suffocating. Something about it made me uneasy, like I was stepping into a trap. What comes next? I asked again, my voice quiet, still shaking. He looked at me, his gaze steady. I'll explain everything, but not now. For now, you need to stay hidden. We'll get some answers, and then we'll figure out how to stop this. I didn't trust him, and not fully. But I had no choice. He was right about one thing, I wasn't safe. Not with my father gone. Not with the people who had been watching us for so long. As I followed him into the cabin, the weight of my situation began to settle in. There was no going back. No more normal life. The world I had known was gone, replaced by a nightmare I couldn't escape. The man closed the door behind us and locked it with a heavy metal bolt. He looked at me, his face hard. The people after you, they won't stop. They'll come for you no matter where you are, but you're not alone in this. I won't let them take you. We have to be ready. I nodded, feeling the sting of tears welling up in my eyes, but I fought them back. I didn't have time for that. I had to stay focused. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun.